Simple warm-up strategy for strongman. So what's the best way to warm up? So personally, I'm a fan of the majority of my training being super specific. So usually when I'm feeling really good, I'll go in and use the specific implement that I'm training on that given day, and I'll be biasing most of my warm up towards exposure to that implement. So say for instance, if I'm going to be doing, say, moving events, for instance, as the big focus of the session, I'll be doing some kind of like plyometric kind of sprint drills and jumps to kind of warm up, and then I'll get on the implement pretty quickly. But I'll almost use the warm up sets as like as an exercise assessment for that day, where I'll be thinking, oh right, I can feel on this right side today that feels a little bit tight, or my foot's turning out a little bit too much there, and then I'll go and use that as to direct me what drills to do before I do my next warm up set, if you will, rather than just generally doing kind of big kind of non-specific warm-up, and basically, because you've got to think every minute that you're doing something non-specific to your goal, it's costing you training time where you could be working to your goal more specifically. I do agree that you have to get more advanced and you have to develop your own understanding to the point to get as confident as, say, what I am with like knowing my body and knowing how to change and what to apply on any given day. So I'll give you a structure that you can kind of use as a bit of a template, and then you can modify it depending on what specific movement you're training on any given day. So an acronym that I first heard from a strength and conditioning coach called Brendan Chaplin, he uses the RAMP acronym, so RAMP, which stands for the R stands for raise your pulse, A stands for activate, M stands for mobilize, and P stands for potentiate, or you can swap that for power up. So raising the pulse just means like generally getting that heart rate up. So it might be just jogging up and down, or it might be, say, doing something like, you know, like very often in our gym, I'll get people to do like a sandbag carry or something, or some variation of a light carry where they're just getting moving and they're finishing the set. Might be a minute, might be a couple of minutes, and the heart rate's up a little bit. The muscles are feeling like they're being warmed up, let's say. And then what you might find that when you do your pulse raiser, you might find that, oh, and I feel like, say, I'm struggling to extend my hip on this. My hip's not extended fully, or my quads are feeling a bit tight today, or whatever. So what you might do, say for instance, if you're struggling with hip extension, for an example, like you might do some stuff where what activates the hip extensors. So the big hip extensors would be say glutes. So you might do some like say glute bridges or some hip thrusts or some RDLs or something like that. But then you still might find that you say using the hip extension as an example, you might find that, right, well, I can feel my glutes a little bit, but I feel a little bit inhibited, and I feel a little bit restricted at the opposing muscle group. So you might use something like, so you might move on to the next thing, which is the M, which is mobilize. So say for instance we're using your hip struggling with hip extension on your pulse raiser, and you've activated the glutes a little bit, and you're still struggling with that hip extension, then we might look to mobilize the opposing muscle group. So you might go to something like a couch stretch or a kneeling hip flexor stretch. You might do like a standing kind of quad stretch that'll help you kind of add tissue tolerance to the hip flexors and quads, etc. So therefore, you go back to the hip extension thing, and you're going to be able to extend your hips through a bigger range of motion, especially coupled with the fact that you've activated the glutes. Yeah. And then the final thing of the kind of warm up sequence will be to potentiate. So put it all together, and put it together as so looking to put it together powerfully and explosively. So this could be like say taking hip extension, for example, if that's the thing that you struggle with. You could go into like say something like broad jumps, for instance, where you're going to be able to jump further forward the more powerful your hip extension is. So that's a kind of nice little generic protocol of how to kind of get you to do a general warm-up bias towards getting your hip extension firing a little bit better. So let's use an example of say you're going for an overhead session and you're warming up your push press, for instance, and you do some, you might do like a little complex. You might grab an axle and you might do some clean and presses as your little pulse raiser. You might do a set of 10 with an empty bar, and then you feel like you look at your video, or you can just feel, and you feel like you your ankle flexibility. Like say a big thing for me, my ankle flexibility on the right side. Just my knee doesn't go over my toe as well as it should as well as the other side when it's cold. So say for instance, what I might do for my activation, the next thing, I might do some like say tibialis raises, or basically like curling my toes up towards my shin in between sets. And then as an activation drill, a mobility drill, I might do like a knee to wall ankle mobility mobilization. And I'm basically just trying to get my knee tracking further forward over my toes whilst keeping my heels down. So then I go into, once I've ticked those off, then I might go into mimicking, say I'm trying to do a warm-up specific to, say, log clean and press. Then I might go into, say, some vertical jumps to finish off. Vertical jumps with the focus on keeping my heels planted as I descend. And then, on the way down, and then exploding up as powerfully as I can. And then I go back to exercise 1, and suddenly my presses feel a lot more explosive and in a better position. My torso staying more vertical, my heels are staying planted, etc. So that just gives you an idea how you can bias it towards a specific kind of training thing. So people wonder about static stretching, dynamic stretching, which is better. And again, like there's countless research out there like supporting the benefits of both. A lot of people say about static stretching that it's going to limit your kind of explosive power, but the trade-off is, if you can use static stretching to improve your tolerance of a specific tissue range of motion, and that helps you achieve a better position. So using my example, if I really stretch my calves on that right side, then I can pause at the bottom of a dip in terms of when I'm doing an overhead lift with a perfectly vertical torso with my heels planted, and it may be a few percent down in terms of explosive power. But the trade-off is like, would I rather be more explosive and have my torso collapsing forward a little bit when I start the drive, and then the rack collapses forward, but powerfully? Or would I rather just take a little bit off the top end power that probably not even noticeable, but in return, every time I drive out of the hole maximally, even though my top end power is a tiny bit down, I'm maintaining a perfectly vertical torso, perfect rack position. So you decide what's going to be best in your context, but that's going to be the benefit of static stretching, opening up positions. Once you've opened up the positions, I would use them. So personally, I would use these two. I'd use these maybe at the start of the session just to get into specific positions. An example like on deadlift day, for instance, it might be, say, making sure that you're getting into deep hip flexion, and you're not limited. That's a big thing for me, is making sure that I'm not limited in hip flexion. So when I get into the deadlift start position, I'm not running out of range of motion from my hips and then my tailbones tucking under, etc. So giving you some ideas there, go and apply.